I'm Keith Powell, and welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. Today our guest is Keith Liggett. Keith is from Fernie and has published a number of books, including the critically acclaimed Island Lake Lodge cookbook. He's most recently published a book of poems as well. So welcome, Keith. Great to have you here today on Talking Kootenay Books. And we're just going to talk about your philosophy when it comes to writing and your success. But first of all, let's talk about your book. Let's talk about the Island Lake cookbook.
That was an interesting project because most cookbooks have one chef, and this one I had 8, which was kind of like herding cats.
Okay.
But it came out really well. We had each one contributed different recipes, and so we got a whole balanced thing. And the lodge has a tremendous history of cuisine.
Right. So what inspired you to go out and write a cookbook?
What was that? Well, actually, Steve, who was the head of Island Lake Lodge, Steve Kite, he asked me to help him put together a cookbook, and I said, "You don't want to do that; they're too expensive." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, it'll cost you a ton to put it out, and you don't want to be selling cookbooks." So we pitched Whitecap Books, and they bought, and we did a proposal and just did the whole 9 yards. And so it was produced by Whitecap, which is the largest publisher of cookbooks in Canada.
Wow.
And that's sort of, then they distribute it, and we had 60 different reviews. You know, they're really good.
So the reaction to the book has been good?
Yeah, it's been really good. We won a Gourmand Award for the best in Canada for photography.
Okay.
Henry George did the photography. It's been really tremendous.
Well, I have to say the book presents itself really well.
Yeah.
So your second book is also about food as well. You don't have a copy here today, but it's about the Fernie food scene. Is that correct?
It was sort of people were going, well, where's our book?
Yeah.
The rest of the restaurants in town. So we just put together 10 restaurants and took a recipe from each one, and then I did a series of essays about Fernie. And so it's more of a Fernie-centric book than just about one place.
And your third book and most recent is a book of poems, and so that's a little bit of a departure from cookbooks, but tell us about the inspiration there.
Well, I've always been a poet. My first work was published in a national literary magazine in the States when I was 16, and it was a poem, 2 poems actually. And so I've always had that. This is my second collection of poems to come out, and it's always been something I've been concerned with and worked with, and I've always, I gravitate toward writers that are poets also. You know, Michael Andante is, he originally started out as poetry. It's really, you know, it's a very immediate and very, it's to the bone. It's a really neat form of writing.
Right. Well, I've heard you read from your book a couple of times, and your poems are really descriptive, and they really capture your attention. I was wondering, you know, you're also involved in a number of writing festivals, writing courses, and that kind of thing. Just tell me about your involvement in those kind of festivals. What sort of, again, inspires you to help others in their writing?
I was really lucky. Almost would have been about 30 years ago, I went to the Aspen Writers Conference, which in those days was an unusual conference. It was, you got credit, graduate school credit at Denver University going to it. And I worked with Bill Kittredge, who was for a long time the head of the writing department in Montana, Missoula. And the idea of the conference was to go and spend a week in intensive work with somebody who's a really well-known and good writer and fine-tune your work. It's like, it's to really work on the craft, and you go home at night and you work on your stuff, and you go back the next day and you get beat up again, you go back again. And that's what really inspired me, was the effect that had on my writing, to be able to work with somebody in a graduate sort of setting. And then I went to graduate school at the University of Colorado, and again was in a workshop setting. So I've always tried to bring that workshop form to writers' conferences, and they're very unusual. Usually you have to go to grad school to get that stuff.
I see. So how did you take that philosophy, that experience that you had, and translated it into writing festivals here in the Kootenays?
Well, I had when I first moved to Fernie 11 years ago, a guy came to me and said, "What would you do off season?" He had a hotel. They didn't have much going on in the summer at that point, and said, "What would you do off season?" I said, "I'd do a writers' conference." He kind of like blank, you know, what's a writers' conference? I go, "Well, you get people to come for a week," and then he starts perking up. You know, it's like, they're going to stay for a week? Yeah, they're going to stay for a week. So, you know, and translate into room nights and stuff. So the Fernie one lasted 4 or 5 years, and the last year I was involved, we generated 350 room nights in town over the time of the conference, which is a lot of room nights for a small town. And so it's sort of, as an economic driver, as a cultural economic driver, that sort of thing is really good.
So you've been involved in a similar, I guess you call it workshop in Caslow recently. Tell us about that. I
have some friends in I've been spending time, I go up there as a retreat basically, and spend a week to 10 days a month and turn off everything and just write, bang, 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 get all sorts of stuff done. Go hiking, go swimming. But some people asked me to do a workshop. I did one last summer, and I just finished one there. And we did a 3-day Friday night, Saturday, Sunday sessions, and then everybody is taking their piece that they've worked on, and they're working on it for 2 weeks. And we're going back. We're having a last session that we'll all workshop, and then they're on their own sort of.
I see. So. Keith, you're obviously sort of a hands-on experience when it comes to workshops and writing festivals. I understand you have another one planned here in the Cranbrook area as well.
Yeah, we do. We're going to, 5 years ago I did one with St. Eugene Resort, and they approached me again and said, can we get that going again? And so we just worked out the dates and some of the people coming. Tom Wayman's going to come and do poetry. Got a couple of people sort of on the line that aren't confirmed. It's going to be Remembrance Day weekend, so it's a stat holiday. We're going to do with Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then we're going to have a 1-day self-publishing workshop on Monday, which is a stat holiday. We always, when we do a bigger conference like that, we always have breakfast together, because then the poets get talking to the novelists, and you get that sort of cultural mix of everybody wandering around. It's really neat.
Interesting. I'm going to put you on the spot, Keith. Can you read a poem for us out of your book? What's the title of the book again?
Like Socks in the Dryer.
Okay.
It's not. It's one poem I can't read, but anyway, this one I can read.
Okay.
This is a neat book. I'll tell a little bit about it afterwards. Late fall. Curtains of snow brush the summit ridges. Rain slicks the streets, hissing with passing cars, with passing bikes, closing the summer, foretelling, bringing the taste of fallen leaves, followed by the bite of winter. So the book is interesting because the cover and the wrap are done on a letterpress, and the rest of it we did in offset. And Mike at Clawhammer Press did the graphics and designed the book. So it's really,
what you're telling me is the book itself is a work of art.
Yeah, it is. I'm really lucky. Mike's a really good friend, and roping him into this sort of thing was really good. So, yeah.
So Keith, tell me what's your advice to aspiring writers? You write yourself. You've been a journalist. You've been a columnist. You've written poetry. You've written a cookbook. What's your advice to someone that wants to get into writing?
Oh, the first thing is you got to write every day. I mean, that's just. I mean, pretty much anybody. If you talk to any successful writer, they write pretty much every day. And maybe just a page, maybe 2 pages, but somebody like Stephen King tries to write 6 to 8 pages a day. And read everything you can. Don't read just one genre. Read broad selection of genres, and read some books on writing. Stephen King's book on writing is really good. Ray Bradbury's book, which is called Zen and the Art of Writing, is really good. And Twyla Thorpe recently put out a book. She's a dancer in New York on creativity. It's called The Creative Habit, and it's a tremendous book. It's really good.
Well, thanks for those tips.
Yeah.
I think people would appreciate that. Well, thank you for your experience. Thank you for taking the time to be our guest on Talking Kootenay Books. It's great to have you here. This is Talking Kootenay Books. I'm Keith Powell. Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm your host today. And our guest is Kevin Miller. Kevin is from Kimberley. Great to have you here, Kevin.
Hey, good to be here.
And you're the author of 2 books. One is a preteen book called Up the Creek. It's #1 book in a series, I understand, Milliken Creek series. So I look forward to discussing this book. And then you have a young children's book, The Moody Bee, which I think is inspired by a local business. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So Kevin, as I mentioned, it's really nice to have you here. Tell me, what inspired you to write the 2 books that we have in front of you today?
Well, we'll start with the Moody Bee first. It was actually inspired by some friends of mine, Randy and Krista Moody, who have a company called Moody Bee, and Randy's a beekeeper. And I thought, it just occurred to me one day that, bees might get a little ticked off when they work hard creating all this honey all season, and along comes Randy and takes it all away. So I just came up with the idea of a bee that was a Moody Bee, and so that's, how that came to be.
Great. So it's a lighthearted approach. I really like the fact that it's easy to read, and it really must appeal to that young audience. So what kind of reaction have you got to the picture book?
A very positive reaction. I mean, with the book, what I tried to do is rhyme as many words with Moody as I possibly could and still tell a somewhat coherent story. So I try to make it fun to read out loud. And yeah, I've read it to a number of kids. We did a launch at the store. I've read it to kids at schools. I've toured various schools over the last little while, and so yeah, it's been quite a positive response.
And beautifully illustrated. The illustrations tell a story in themselves. So so well done. Let's talk about the second book that you've done, and this is recently published as well, I understand.
Yeah, the second book is Up the Creek. So it's the first book in a series called the Milligan Creek series. It's actually set in a fictionalized version of the town I grew up in, which is Foam Lake, Saskatchewan.
Okay. A
little nondescript place on the number 16 highway, and it's really. This book is about an adventure. 4 friends decide to canoe this creek that runs through town right around this time of year during spring runoff season, and they end up in a way bigger adventure than they anticipated. So it's a lot of the adventures in the series are based on things that either happened to me growing up or things I kind of dreamed about doing growing up.
When I read through the book, it again was a fun read, lots of action, lots of things taking place. The young characters that you portray in there seem to be pretty real to life. What is the reaction that you get when you take your book into, say, a school or read it to a classroom or have them read it? What kind of reaction do you get from those preteens that you've written the book for?
Positive. I get a lot of laughter at certain parts. I had one teacher tell me that she had to skip forward. It's the only book she's ever read. She had to skip forward to the end of the book to see if these guys survived. She was so uptight. So yeah, but it's been good. I've actually toured extensively over the last 5 months at schools all across Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC, and done a lot of workshops and reading of the book and that sort of thing. And yeah, it's been good. Another school, they sent me a stack of, I don't know, like 30-some letters from students that they had written in response to it. And yeah, it's been, there's nothing like, I've mostly worked on stuff for adults before. I have a background in film and publishing and that sort of thing, but working for kids, I mean, that immediacy of meeting the audience, especially if they've just recently read the book, it's pretty fun. I mean, they're a great audience.
So Kevin, when it comes to your book and the accounts, you said there's a little bit of yourself in these books. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, there's a lot of me in there, but everyone says, well, which character are you? And I'm like, well, I'm all of them, and none of them. I drew inspiration from a lot of people I knew, and just again, like I said, there's a heavy dose of imagination in there as well, but all inspired by my life growing up in Saskatchewan.
Sure. So can you give us a glimpse of what the second book is going to be about?
Yeah, the second book is called Unlimited, and these boys, it's about how they figure out a way to hijack a radio signal that's coming from a Ducks Unlimited marsh, and so they decide to try and hijack that signal and broadcast their own program, and it of course gets them into some kind of trouble. So every book kind of revolves around them pushing the limits in terms of the rules, and it's because that's sometimes where you find the fun in life.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that they had no problem getting into a little bit of hot water from time to time. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
So typical teenagers for sure.
Yeah.
So again, let's just explore the fact that one book's illustrated, one's a straight story. Any preference from your point of view?
I kind of enjoy them both. I mean, I'm actually working on another children's book right now. I haven't engaged the artist yet, but I will shortly. And I really enjoy that because it's a fairly short process in terms of conception to finished book, whereas when you're working on a novel or a film or something like that, it could take months or years. And so I like, the quickness of that. But I also, with a novel, it's kind of fun to just really take your time and just really build things visually and just in terms of the prose. So I can't say I have a preference. I just enjoy moving around to different types of projects. So
yeah, and as you know, we live in a digital age. What kind of feel do you have when you go into a school for young people relating to books and wanting to read?
I see a lot of enthusiasm for reading. I mean, I think it depends a lot on who the teachers are and how that's promoted, but you know, a lot of the places I went in Saskatchewan in particular, they've had a whole year or two where they're promoting literacy, so really trying to push that on kids. And I always give my little lecture to kids that this is not the way to read, and you know, on your phone, you know, that reading books is like planting seeds in your mind that are eventually going to grow into something. And so, you know, I kind of drive home that message as well. But I do see a lot of enthusiasm.
Good.
Yep.
That's important.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people think people aren't reading anymore, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And I've talked to literally thousands of students over the last 5 months, and you know, it's fairly consistent across the schools.
Right. Well, thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate you being our guest today on Talking Kootenay Books. Let's just review the two books again. The first one, Up the Creek, so a preteen novel, so lots of adventure.
Yep.
And the second book, a picture book, The Moody Bee, so a rhyming picture book that's sure to appeal to the young set. So congratulations. I think I mentioned to you, I read both books to my grandsons, and their grandson approved.
Awesome.
So,
great.
Thank you again. Appreciate you taking the time. And my name is Keith Powell, and this has been Talking Kootenay Books. Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm your host. This show is about local Kootenay authors, authors that have really recorded, in many cases, the history of our valley. And I'm really pleased today and honored to welcome Naomi Miller. Naomi is from Wausau.
Yep, Wausau.
And it's great to have you here. You've written what I consider one of the most important books in our region, and it's Fort Steele, Gold Rush to Boomtown. So when did you write the book?
Well, I researched it for 8 years, and then all of a sudden I was off committees, so I sat down and wrote for 2 years, and it was accepted by the publisher in 2002, and it seemed to take forever to print once they had got it in their hands.
So you really told the story of Fort Steele, and I thought you brought it alive. A lot of the colorful characters that were in Fort Steele are showcased in your book. Any favorite character that sort of stood out in your mind?
Well, my favorite Kootenay character is Frank Armstrong, the riverboat captain who came out of, and his brother, James Armstrong, was the government agent at, first of all up in Donald and Golden, and then he was sent to Fort Steele the moment that they built that government office at Fort Steele. They were very interesting characters. And for the reference to the Armstrong brothers, Win Weir, who's now gone, an Invermere historian, told me about her grandpa and her Uncle Frank.
Right. So Winifred Weir, a local historian that many people knew over many years, she was a relative of Captain Armstrong. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And she told you firsthand these stories?
She told me behind-the-scenes stories.
Okay.
Like the fact that her mother washed the floor of Christchurch Anglican on the morning before her wedding. Just,
oh, wow.
just to kill time.
Wow. So, you know, not only have you recorded history, but you've actually talked to a lot of these historical people in person. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I made an effort to find as many living contacts as possible. Right.
So, Naomi, tell me about the reason you're so interested in history. I understand that you're an honorary member of the BC Historical Society. What drives you to have such an interest or passion for history?
Well, I got involved mainly in Golden, and I found more and more that local history is fun. It's not King Alfred or the World War or whatever. It's people and how they settled in our part of the world.
Right. So you really brought that to life when you wrote about Fort Steele, because I could, when I read through your book, I sort of feel like I'm living there. It gives us a really good glimpse into that area. So congratulations on your book. I consider your book as one of the classic books about history of our local region. I congratulate you for writing it. So thank you for being a guest today on Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. I'm Keith Powell. It's an opportunity to talk to local writers and authors, and today we're going to be talking to Jeff Pugh. Jeff is a poet behind the book 1 Foot In. Jeff, it's great to have you here on Talking Kootenay Books. Talk about poetry and so forth. So just let's talk about the premise of the book and what really inspired you to write down these 80+ poems that we find within your new book.
Yeah, thanks. Nice. Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. Yeah, I started writing poetry. I started teaching creative writing about 18 years ago in Kimberley at the high school. And a few years into it, one of the parents said, "Do you write yourself?" And I wasn't writing at the time. I think that inspired me to start writing. So I started writing poetry because my attention span matches a poem versus a novel. And yeah, I started writing poems and yeah, just was always intrigued by the sort of details of life, and poetry sort of is a really good medium for just capturing the sort of those images in that we sort of encounter in our within ourselves and stuff we come across when we wander into something as well.
Excellent. So Jeff, just tell me about the process that you go about. How do you get inspired to write down a poem? Is it something that comes out of your day-to-day life? Is it an experience you've had? What sort of inspires you or motivates you?
Yeah, good question. I think typically it's it could start with an image, something we're struck by that maybe triggers an emotion, or it could work sort of the other way. It could be an emotion that I feel that I want to sort of anchor in specific images and sort of day-to-day minutiae, life events.
Excellent. So also explain to me, you told me that you're a creative writer instructor. How do you relate to your students and help them appreciate the value of poetry?
Yeah, you know, I was going to say I don't have to, but that's not exactly true. We do a lot of sort of free verse. We don't do form poetry, rhyming poetry, and it's just a way for kids. I always just tell them they're just words, that you don't have to think of poem versus sort of any other sort of prose structure. They're just a collection of words that represent, you know, experiences and things we notice in life. And I always say, as artists, we tend to notice things sometimes other people don't, and as poets or writers, that's our job, is to notice those things that sort of other people feel or see and maybe don't experience it in the same way. So
Jeff, tell me, what motivates you to write it down? I know we all see things, we all observe things. What really motivates you to document that?
Yeah, I think it's just you know, like any art form, I can't draw, so I'm just intrigued by words, and I think sometimes I get obsessed with sounds and the way words come together, and the way images sort of form a feeling or connote something. And so yeah, poetry is a good, like I said, a good medium for my attention span, because I can't. A friend of mine is doing a novel, and it's taken him over a year, and I just can't imagine spending that much dedicated focus on one long project. Yeah.
Excellent. So you've had some success. I noticed you've been on CBC Radio. You've done a few interviews there, so forth. So what has been the reaction to your book? It's been out for several months now.
Yeah, it's been really it's been really good. Yeah, poetry in Canada is I think a tough sell, like it is anywhere. Because it just doesn't catch on like novels. But yeah, I've been really happy with the reception. It's been selling well, and the responses have been really great, from whether it's somebody doing a review or someone from CBC talking about it, or a neighbor who came by and left a note on my door, taped to my door, a retired woman who got it from the library. She said she read it twice, and or 2 or 3 times, and loved it. And so yeah, it's been really fun.
Well, you know, when I read through a number of your poems, I just noted that there was a real human element, a real connection there that I think people would really appreciate. I think you've got a couple of favorite
yeah, no, I've got
in
yeah.
the book.
Okay, this one's called "There's Been a Terrible Mistake." There's been a terrible mistake. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the applause and everything you've done, the mini golf coupons, the masseuse you sent to my room last night, those kind letters to my mother apologizing for when I stole her cigarettes. This Anne Murray paperweight will make a perfect gift for my son. But you've got the wrong guy. I pilfer from tsunami relief. As a kid, I avoided milk. I laugh when a robin crashes into a window. I can't fix our toilet when it breaks. And did I mention this is a rental tuxedo? Check under your seats. I have nothing to offer. Look beside you. Your date is a stranger. The building we're in has escaped. My feet are too big for these shoes. If I thought they deserve it, they'd ache. But I promise to behave. I will tip the maid, throw small fish back, pass out before getting too drunk. But don't feel bad on my account. Let's stick around, have a drink, eat some cheese, thank our lucky stars we're not who we think we are.
Thank you, Jeff. So your book has got a great variety of poems that a lot of them relate to our own area and experiences that you've had here in the Kootenays. So it makes for an interesting read. So let's just talk about the process when you sit down to write. Is it something that you do every day, or is it when the inspiration sort of hits you?
Not, you know, I've got a friend. One of the editors from the press, Neopoisis Press, Stephen Roxburgh, who writes every day, and I've been in admiration of him for 30 years. But no, I write when I feel drawn to it, and a lot of disciplined writers will say there's no such thing as being drawn to it, that it's just a discipline of sitting down every day. But yeah, so I don't write every day, but I'm also writing a lot of magazine sort of articles, so I tend to do that quite a bit as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff, for giving us an insight into your book. Just maybe highlight the name of it again.
Yeah, it's One Foot In by Neopoisis Press.
So give me the significance of that title.
The title. I wrote a poem about my dad called One Foot Out, and it was just something I was working through about his approach to life, and I think sort of you could approach a river or a lake, both feet in, 1 foot in or 1 foot out, and I just thought, yeah, 1 foot in is probably the way that I approach it most of the time, and hopefully get the other one in there at one time a little bit later.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So thanks again for sharing. We really appreciate you taking the time today, and congratulations on your book.
Yeah, thanks.
It's an achievement.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So I'm Keith Powell, and this has been Talking Kootenay Books.